In a world of ancient avionics, one Seattle company is breaking all the rules. Now in airplanes everywhere, coming soon to your panel. There's a reason, pilots. Fly Dynon.
Rated A for your airplane.
It's Steph Strickland here with another segment for EAA Spirit of Aviation Week. Very excited to introduce you to Sarah Talucci. If you don't already know her, she goes on Instagram as Cirrus Sarah. Speaking of living the Cirrus lifestyle, you are living the Cirrus lifestyle.
I am. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Where are you joining us from?
I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina today.
Your flying career it's impressive. I mean, you have so many, as we were sort of just talking about, you have so many acronyms behind your name. For people who are tuning into this broadcast, talk to me about all your ratings that you have and how many hours you have. It blows my mind.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm an ATP, so airline transport pilot for multi-engine. I have my commercial single engine land, CFI, CFII, AGI, and IGI. And I'm coming up on 4,000 hours.
And remind me, what's the AGI and IGI?
Yeah, AGI is advanced ground instructor and IGI is instrument ground instructor.
4,000 hours? Wow. I'm actually speechless. Do you even remember your first solo then?
I do, yeah. Everyone does. Yeah, my first solo was a lot of fun. It was in Ithaca, New York, so that's where I learned to fly after doing a kind of intro flight at my home airport. So I did all of my ratings back home in I did my solo in upstate New York and my private pilot license, and then I kind of went to an aviation school and moved away for the rest.
What was your solo like? Do you take me back to the moment when you realized that you did it? You flew an airplane by yourself.
I think that I was really nervous on the ground, and I ran my checklist like 1,000 times before. My instructor was just sitting on the ramp like, is there a problem? And so I was just moving really slow, and I just wanted to make sure I did everything right. And then it didn't really hit me until my first takeoff, and I became airborne, and the plane kind of like popped up, and I was like, oh my gosh, there isn't like no one's sitting right here. So it was just a cool moment. I'm sure everyone remembers their first solo forever.
When you finally passed your check ride, did you know at that point, were you just so sold on aviation that you knew that you were going to blaze through the rest of these ratings and certificates, or what happened after that moment when you became a full-fledged PPL?
Yeah, so the first thing I did was I took my dad flying, and that was really special to me. He was my very first passenger. So he and my grandpa they took me to air shows when I was little, and they got me into aviation. So I always kind of thought that was what I was going to do, but I wasn't certain on the career path until I got my PPL. And it was a lot of fun, and I was having a great time with it, and I was trying to figure out how to make a career out of it. And so that's when I decided to sort of like get serious and transfer into an aviation college. Did
your dad have an aviation background beyond taking you to air shows along with your grandfather?
No, my grandpa was a pilot. So this is really cool. In my house, I have his pilot's license framed next to my pilot's license. So I have those up on my wall. It's really great to have. And I actually have his first medical from forever ago. So those are like great keepsakes. But my dad wasn't a pilot and isn't a pilot. I think now that I'm a CFI, I'm always like, come on, Dad, let's go for your first lesson. Let's do it. So I keep pressuring him to get it done, but we haven't done it yet.
I think that would be amazing. You shared some really cool photos of your grandma and your grandpa and flying with them. Tell me a little bit about your desire to travel and see the world, because it clearly was instilled in, the exposure that your dad and your grandpa gave you to aviation.
Yeah, I grew up in a really small town in upstate New York, And I always wanted to get out more and see the world and go to every state and fly around. So part of aviation was there was a passion for it. And part of it was just like, let's get out and see things. And this is like one way to get that done. So it's been a lot of fun sharing aviation with my family after the fact. And especially now that I'm a flight instructor and I get to like sit in the right seat and let them move the controls and things like that. So I'm really looking forward to taking my niece and nephew up someday. They're really little right now, but we'll get there. But I took my grandma for her very first flight when she was 87, and that was a really special moment.
So how did that conversation go? Hey, Grandma, I know you're 87, but let's go flying. How did that happen?
So she had to be somewhere. So we were in upstate New York and she needed to be in North Carolina for New Year's. And she'd never flown in a small plane before. And my uncle was going to drive her, which it's not a short drive. It's horrible. So I was like, hey, I'm kind of going that way. Why don't you just hop in the plane with me? And she was just like, no, thanks. And she was super polite, but she wanted nothing to do with it. And I'm like, no, really, it's going to be fun. So I totally pressured her into doing it. And I had all the grandkids, like, just pressure Grandma to like go flying with me. And so she finally agreed. And then the morning of the flight, it was snowing. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's going to be scared, or she's not going to like this, and it's not going to be fun for her. But it was a pretty small layer. And so it was snow and then a little bit of like kind of cloudy stratus kind of crap. And then above was beautiful. And so like for the whole flight, it was beautiful, but I was like, man, I'm going to scare her in the first half an hour. But we climbed through it and she didn't say anything. And then we got up on top and we kind of got into it. And then I'm like, what do you think, Graham? And then she was just like, wow, it's really beautiful. And she ended up having a blast, and we have tons of pictures, and she had a great time.
I'm looking forward to sharing some of those photos with the folks who are watching this. I think there's a moment when many of us who we fly commercially, which means we're never up front to see the moment where you pop out on top. And for those of us who've had the good fortune to have that experience, it's unparalleled. Why is aviation so important to you?
I just really like staying connected with people. It's been such a great way, to be around friends, and, especially aviation, like going to Oshkosh or like seeing these people in the community that goes with it is just a lot of fun. It's great to be a part of.
And there's certainly a sense of freedom for folks, particularly like you, who are as accomplished of a pilot as you are. You mentioned earlier that you went to an aviation university. Tell me about your college experience and sort of how it helped shape your flying career.
I went to Daniel Webster College in New Hampshire. So it was great in the beginning. The school actually closed down after I got my instrument rating. So they closed their flight program, which was a pretty solid setback. But the people who were in the program and moving forward were sort of grandfathered in. So we were able to finish out all of our ratings and kind of move forward. It was a very tight-knit community after the fact, just because there weren't so many people and there weren't obviously new students coming in. So with that super tight-knit community, it's just great to know all of those people. I'm still in contact with all of them. And it was cool to have like a very solid group of people to study with and to train with and to go over questions with. And I think that made a big difference in my training.
You mentioned the word setback, and I think for anyone at any point in pursuing their pilot's license is going to run into something that is going to feel like a setback. If it's one that's mental, if it's one that involves your flight school, whatever it is, there's going to be something. Can you talk about the role of perseverance in being successful in aviation long-term?
Yeah, I think you're so right. There's always there's always something in your flying career or in your flight training. And as a flight instructor, I've seen that time and time again. And it's just so important to kind of, if this is something that you want to do and it's something that you're enjoying or having fun with, I think you have to really take a minute and go back to why are you doing this, and remember that it is fun, and kind of take a time out when you get stuck on things. I know I had moments like that in my private pilot training, and my instructor would be like, hey, let's go grab lunch or something, and just remember why we love this. So there's so many moments where it feels like you're not moving forward, and that's okay, and everyone feels that way. And just to kind of like take a time out and then come back and tackle it again, talk to people that you love and trust and support you, and it's, you'll get through it.
When you talked about taking a flight, to remind yourself of how much you loved it, one of the things that kind of occurs to me, particularly in the world of COVID as it exists right now, is a lot of folks, not everybody, but a lot of folks are flying GA a lot less. Given that you have 4,000 hours, and given that you have many acronyms after your name, how long does it take for you to feel rusty? You can fly a lot of different airplanes, but how long before you're like, all right, let's go through this again? Like, how long does that, for me, it would be, as soon as I got out of the plane, automatically rusty. What's that like for you?
That's been really interesting, actually. I usually fly like 3 or 4 days a week, but it's mostly around the Carolinas, so I'm super comfy in my own territory, and I just like deal with the same people all the time and the same controllers and the same airspace. So I think like the idea of being rusty is really interesting, because as soon as I kind of venture out of my little bubble here in the Southeast and do flying, on the West Coast, immediately rusty. So that's one thing to consider. It took me a good 3 weeks to feel like, hey, I should probably go out and get some landings in and, just get out there again. But what was interesting was my personal minimums had changed. So I went out flying after 3 weeks to a month-ish. And I just did like a really small local flight. So that was good. But then, the next day it was really super windy and gusting. And I'm like, 3 weeks ago, I probably wouldn't have thought about that, but today I am. So I think just kind of adjusting for your skill level and for how long you've been out of the cockpit is so important.
I'm making all these mental notes for myself, and I think that's really good when you talk about sort of what your personal minimums are in all of this. I want to go back. So you mentioned that you graduated from college and you've stayed in touch with all these people who are all part of the program that closed down while you were going through it. What was your first job out of college?
My first job, I was a flight instructor. So I had this whole like vision of what that looked like for me when I was in school, and kind of what I was going to do as soon as I got out of school and where I was going to go and all that stuff. So my plan was to teach at Daniel Webster College, and then that didn't happen. So I found a new flight school. So I went to Bridgewater State University, and that's where I taught for a couple of years.
What was it like being, relatively speaking, a new pilot? I mean, in the big scheme of things, in terms of a lifetime, now teaching, and that's the way it is at many flight schools, being young and building up your hours as an instructor. What was that like? Were you teaching people who were mostly younger themselves, or was it a wide range? Were you the only woman teaching? What was that like?
Yeah, I was the only woman teaching. I was also the youngest. So I think I was 21 or 22 when I was flight instructing. The good thing was that I was flight instructing at a 141 school at a college, so it was mostly college kids. So I had them beat, but only by like a year or two. But there were a couple older students that came back, or military or something like that I was teaching. So there were a few people older than me. But yeah, it's an interesting experience. I remember when I was going through just going through my pilot's license, and I thought that the person sitting to my right was just amazing. Like, they knew everything, they could do no wrong. And then all of a sudden I was in the right seat, and I'm like, I don't know that we know enough, it was definitely an interesting perspective. So that was cool to kind of transition to the right seat and start teaching others.
When you talk to some of the CFIs in the space, like Jason with Learn the Finer Points, who've been around a while, that, they'll tell you at every, he's got 20 some odd years or something like this as an instructor now and countless hours. Every rating, every certification becomes this like license to learn. And I find it interesting that that was your realization. Now you're in the instructor seat, but there are still things to learn about how to be an effective instructor. For the folks who are still interested in learning how to fly at some point, what recommendation would you make to them in selecting a good instructor?
Oh, that's such a good question. I didn't do any of these things, and I wish that I did. And the thing is, it also sort of depends on where you're going. Like if you're going to your local flight school and you're going to do like a Part 61 thing, it's, that's awesome. And you probably have so many choices. For a 141, like a college, it's very structured. Your choices are a little bit more limited, and it's probably based on your schedule or something. But it's so important that you have someone that teaches and communicates in the way that you learn. There's so many times where there's like miscommunications, and it truly is just that. So I would say it would be a great idea just to kind of get to know your flight instructor, maybe outside of the cockpit a little bit more, and just make sure that that you kind of get along and that you communicate effectively. It's so important, especially with the amount of time and money you're spending with that person. It's so important that you feel comfortable and confident with them and supported.
You flight instructed for how many years before you moved on to the next thing?
Only about 2 years. Yeah.
What happened after that?
So from there, I became a first officer at PlaneSense. So I was based in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, flying the PC-12.
There is a photo, and I want to know the story behind this. And tell me about the PC-12 on the grass strip. Because when I saw it, I thought to myself, it doesn't look like that belongs there. But what's the story?
So yeah, we did quite a few grass strips at PlaneSense. There were quite a few that were approved by our off specs. That one specifically was called the farm. So it was kind of a guy's backyard. Kind of meaning definitely. So I think it's somewhere in Maryland, and we would just drop in and drop him off like right there at his house. So that was a blast.
There is this other, and now I'm just rethinking how much acreage I need. So there's this other photo that you have that is fantastic. And it involves basically a very busy day. So big delays for IFR traffic. This was in JFK. Take me back to this because it's a spectacular photo, and it's you also in the PC-12. What happened that day?
Yeah. So that was actually my first day at PlaneSense. So I was flight instructing, and I was in 172s, and I was, in a class Delta airspace for a while. And then all of a sudden I'm in the right seat of a PC-12, and my trip sheet was Boston to JFK to Teterboro. And I was like, gosh, I've never done any of these airports, let alone, with passengers and crowded airspace and all this stuff. So I guess the first leg, well, I remember landing in Boston because I was doing radios, and we taxied off the runway, and I swapped over to ground, and the ground controller was already halfway through my taxi clearance when I got there. And I was like, oh no. And I kind of gave my captain a look hey, I'm just the new guy, sorry. So that was fun. So he was just like, oh my goodness. So I had to ask Boston to repeat my taxi clearance. It didn't happen again, but it happened the first time. So then we went to JFK, and then that was a non-event. And when we were trying to leave JFK, we had some pretty strong delays. So I think it was about 2 hours to get our IFR clearance out. We're like, man, we could walk to Teterboro by that time. So we decided to fly the Hudson Corridor VFR, and that's how that picture came about. So that was a pretty fun day and eye-opening. I learned a lot. a lot in my first day.
On your first day on the job. Like that's the thing that's okay, so what do you do now? Tell folks about your job currently.
Yeah, I'm a regional sales director for Cirrus Aircraft now. So I've been here a little over 5 years now, and I sell airplanes.
I have talked to other folks who work in your industry for different aircraft manufacturers, but I've never actually asked this question. And I understand, but I just want you to delineate it for me. What does this job entail? Because as a non-pilot who cannot buy an airplane, the closest thing I can come up to is purchasing a new car, which is nothing like what you do. So for folks who aren't pilots themselves, but who are watching this, what does your job entail?
So we walk people through the sales process. So people who have never considered buying an airplane to people who are like, oh, someday I'm going to buy an airplane. So we find those people for starters. And so we do that by, having relationships with flight schools. So we meet all of the new students that are coming in, or we do events, or we go to Oshkosh. So all of those things. So we meet all of these people. And then we help them figure it out. So we point them in the direction of like a great flight instructor that can help them, or, finance or insurance, or, whatever that obstacle may be between them and owning an airplane. And then kind of the last step is usually a demo flight. So we get to kind of fly over to them, take them and maybe a family member or a friend or someone that is an advisor for them, and just kind of fly around, do a little flight, show them the capabilities of the airplane, and show them how that changes their life or changes their flying. And then hopefully they would purchase an airplane, and then we kind of help them right up until they deliver.
This reminds me, I was having a conversation with someone who works in your line of work who was saying most airplanes that you will purchase will accomplish 80% of, and this is me in my head, I'm pretending I've won the lottery. Most airplanes you purchase will accomplish 80% of your flying goals. It is incredibly difficult to find one that accomplishes what you're trying to do 100% of the time. What's your personal philosophy on that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So we normally say if it is something that's 80% of your mission, then that's a great fit. So if I'm living in North Carolina, but all of my trips are 3.5 hours and I like going up really high and catching a good tailwind on the way home, then for us personally, that would be like a 22T. Yeah. So that's what I get to fly every day. So I have a demonstrator in my hangar here at the airport.
Yeah, I have total plane envy. So when you have an opportunity to fly these different aircraft and the different airframes in the Cirrus family, what is that like? Do you have like a pinch yourself kind of a moment, or of all the different jobs you've done over the years, how does this one really stack up in terms of personal satisfaction and fun flying?
Yeah, this one's really great because this is going to sound weird because I'm a pilot, but I love being home a lot. So, at PlaneSense, I was traveling a ton. I was always on the road. I always had my suitcase packed. I was eating at restaurants every single night, and up to and including Thanksgiving, Christmas, everything. So with Cirrus, I don't really have any of those problems. That was like my interview question. I'm like, do I get Christmas off? And they were like, where did you come from? So yeah, it's a lot of fun. I get to be home a lot. I get holidays off. They give me an airplane that I fly around. I get to use that once in a while for personal travel. All of those things make it really solid, make it a really, really good fit.
You just roll into the airport in your personal airplane, you hop out and you're like, here I am. Like, it's just,
exactly.
It's so awesome. Do you have a favorite, and I'm putting you on the spot here, but do you have a particular delivery? Obviously we don't have to talk about the individual, but the moment of delivering an airplane that really stands out to you as being kind of special or sweet or funny?
I think all of them are it's so much fun. So just depending on where we're at in the year, it takes us 3.5 months to build an airplane from scratch. And usually it takes a lot longer than that, like maybe, 6 months or 8 months to actually deliver the airplane. So from the point that you order to the point that you take delivery, we could have been working on this for a good 6 months. And I probably knew you a while before that because of the whole sales process leading up. So usually just over the course of that period of time, I'm really close with my customers, or we've had like a lot of interactions leading up to that moment. So it's always really special, and it's always something that they've worked a long time towards. So I think all of them have been really special to me and fun.
You included a photo of us that shows delivery day, and it looks like something out of like a Hollywood red carpet event. Like, how does that process work? It's very fancy.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of fun. So delivery day for me, because I live in the Carolinas, I usually will try to schedule a 1 p.m. delivery. So what I like to do is wake up early that morning and go pick up my customer and their family. So ideally we would pick them up first thing in the morning, have some coffee, hang out, and we would hop over to Knoxville. So that's where our customer delivery center is. Between like 11 to 12, we would do a tour. At noon, lunch is catered in every day. So we all sit down and have lunch together. People that are coming through their type rating training, or other people that are taking delivery, or people that took delivery earlier in the week. So we all get to hang out and talk about, what everyone's there for and what's going on. And then at 1 p.m. on the dot, we go into the delivery center. So we put you in a car and we drive into the hangar, and they open the door. And then your plane is kind of in the back. It's all dark, and they put a spotlight on your airplane. And then they kind of like light it up, and you get to step out of the car and walk down the red carpet with like music, and, everybody's there to celebrate.
There's a show that predates you that was called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous with Robin Leach, and it feels like a very like Robin Leach Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous moment. I want to talk about how EAA fits into this, because you've mentioned coming to Oshkosh in particular as being really important to you, and we have a number of photos that really showcase, what AirVenture brings to the table for Cirrus and for what you do professionally. What makes EAA AirVenture so special for you?
I think the community of it, outside of a sales perspective, it's such a great time to reconnect with all the people that you've met throughout the years. So I've traveled a lot specifically with Cirrus, but I've lived in a bunch of different states. So I have like pilot friends or customer friends or college friends. So I get to see all of those people again, which is my favorite. And, it's a great time to get together and to see everybody and catch up for the year. Plus me and a bunch of friends run the Oshkosh 5K. We eat a lot of ice cream, all of the things. and then yes, of course, as a side note, it's literally our best selling week of the entire year. So people really do come to Oshkosh to buy airplanes from us. And that's always a really fun time too.
No matter what you're doing in aviation, while the act of being pilot in command of an aircraft is a solitary one, everything else involves a level of teamwork. If you're flying with, anyone sitting up front with you, if it's an instructor or, just whatever it is, it takes a team. The photos that you sent of your time at AirVenture are awesome because it really showcases what looks to be like a fantastic team. So I'm curious about the value of teamwork for you guys in accomplishing what it is you're trying to do, especially when you're coming from, all over the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you mean for Oshkosh specifically, or just?
Yeah, it looks like it's a great sort of clearinghouse for all kinds of folks to get together. Yeah. And I see photos of you with this, expansive, a bunch of people wearing, the awesome Cirrus blue polos. And then there's Mike Goulian in a couple photos. And then there's Karen and their daughter in a couple photos. It's just like a great kind of coming together of a big team.
Yeah. And outside of that, so for Cirrus, because I cover a territory that's multiple states, I'm the only person here for like a few hours, like a few hour flight. So my closest coworker to me is in DC, and then I have another coworker in Atlanta. So I really never get to see my coworkers. Like we do sales calls once in a while, like on video, but I never get to see them in person. So outside of, just kind of industry people, there's also my own coworkers who I don't ever see. So it's a really good time where we can all get together.
Tell me a little bit about, you get to do some really cool flying. Take me back to your flying in Alaska.
Yeah, that was a really fun, that was a great trip. So Cirrus does these kind of Cirrus Life trips in conjunction with the Flight Academy. So they're a Seattle-based flight school, and they are spectacular. So they have trips that go through Europe, and they have trips that go through the Caribbean, and trips that go through Alaska. So they kind of pair up people who own their own airplane and want to fly it in a unique area with a mentor pilot. So that's what I got to be for a week, and just take you through a very spectacular location. So last summer, I got to do the Alaska trip with a bunch of Cirrus owners. So we started in Seattle, and we kind of worked our way up. And we did some amazing glacier flying, and just got to see so many great things, whales, and we did some fishing, we did some kayaking. We got to experience all of it.
Aviation makes the world feel smaller to some degree.
Yeah.
What is one rating that you don't have that you wish you had?
My seaplane. Yeah.
Solid answer.
Yeah. I'm really excited about that one. I want to do it so bad.
I have no doubt you'll nail it. And then you can just put that on the end of all the acronyms. Let me ask you finally, before we wrap things up, what advice would you give to someone watching this who's considering a career in aviation? Maybe they're younger, or they're in a space where they can reinvent themselves. What would you recommend to them?
I think networking is really powerful. So that's something that was sort of forced on me when my college closed, is that all of these flight instructors that I had kind of dispersed. And so I stayed in touch with all of those people. And then after I taught for a couple of years, I reached out to all of them and tried to see, what are you guys doing now? Is it something cool? Can I come? All of those things. So that was a big one. And then the other thing is just aviation it's such a huge industry. And I think people get pigeonholed on like, I am going to the airlines, or I am going to fly corporate. And there's so many more jobs out there, and so many more opportunities out there that, that maybe aren't front and center when you think of an aviation career. So really take the time to explore what other opportunities are out there.
Well, if you want a chance to catch up with what Sarah Talucci is up to, you can follow her on Instagram at Cirrus Sarah. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And that is another Spirit of Aviation Week segment. Much more in store. Stay tuned, as they say.
You may know